Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. I was made aware yesterday, for those of you who are listening into last week's show, an interview with Andrew Lees, who wrote a wonderful book, Mentored by a Madman, about the strange influence that William Burroughs had on his own career as a Parkinson's researcher. A very interesting conversation about science and word viruses and medical practice and the alternative medicine and such. But I was made aware that there was some very curious noises on the recording that a friend of mine described it, and it sounded like Andrew was sort of walking around his house doing the dishes, going to the bathroom. But because Andrew's face was on the screen, like usually we cut off the video, but he left his video on, and the otherwise the sound seemed fine. And so I could tell that he wasn't doing any of these things. So there was some kind of mysterious force that leaned in and interfered with the signal, and I can only believe that it was the ghost of William Burroughs, because if you know Burroughs's work, not only did he write these crazy books and he made cut-up collages with texts, but he also made these wonderful audio tapes where they would cut up things, and it sounded basically like a Burroughs cut-up. So just to let you know that paranormal things can happen even on this humble podcast. And I thought that that having a brief chat here about alien signals and strange evocative radio tapes would be appropriate for our conversation today with my old pal David Pescovitz. I probably know him if you're a fan of Boing Boing, which I've been since the very, very beginning, ye old days of actual physical zines. And he's been a co-editor there forever, as well as a futurist with the Institute for the Future. And recently he's been involved with a project that when I first heard about it, I was completely overjoyed and immediately went to the Kickstarter and threw them some cash. But it turned out like I was not the only one doing this. And this project is the 40th anniversary edition of the Voyager Golden Record, as most of you probably know, when we sent out the Voyager probes to go check out some of the outer planets and hurtle themselves into interstellar space. In addition to all of the various, rationalist, scientific, technological gear, these devices were fitted with the Golden Record, the interstellar or interplanetary disk, filled with music, some analog encoded photographs, and greetings from many Earth speakers of different Earth languages. And like a lot of people, when I read about this, as a kid, I was just overwhelmed with this sort of romance of the idea of an LP being hurtled into space. And also, like a lot of people, I assumed one day I would be able to hear it. And there was never really an official release. We can talk more about it. And David, along with some pals, a fellow from the local Amoeba Records, my favorite record store here in San Francisco and Los Angeles, got together to put this record out, and it's come out, and it was the most successful Kickstarter operation for a record release ever. They raised over $1 million, and it's a beautiful package. 4 LPs, a wonderful book that has all the photographs in it, and a great essay by Tim Ferriss, who's a science writer who was involved in the original project and friends of Carl Sagan. And I've just been listening to it, and it's a wonderful collection, and not just as a historical artifact, but just as a collection of world music. It's a great thing. So I thought I'd bring David on, and then later on we'll probably talk some more about Boing Boing and other matters of pop futurism and digital culture. But David, with no further ado, welcome to Expanding Mind.
I am so happy to be here, Erik. You and I have been friends for a long time, since the early cyberdelic days of the early 90s in the Bay Area. But I've been a fan of your show since you started it. So I'm absolutely honored to be on this with you.
Well, and I'm really happy we have this such a nice concrete event to hang it on. It's always good to bring people on. You know, I like to just talk to my friends online sometimes or on the show, but it's always nice to have that nice juicy hook. And you must be feeling really happy now about the great response of this record. And you know, I don't need to tell you or any of our listeners that it's some pretty grim times, man. You know, I spend a lot of my day. Yes. Fighting despair and yet keeping up with feeling needing to keep up with things and though it's in a way a little sad because you know you can listen to this recording and there's in a lot of ways you realize how different it was in the 70s. Space, technology, optimism, the future, very different kinds of stories. But this record really was quite moving in a lot of ways, and I know that you had that experience as well when you were conceiving the project and then doing some of the early research that was required to get your hands on the masters and such.
Yeah, I mean it was I say this the Voyager record when it went up in 1977. It was a gift from humanity to the cosmos, but it was also a gift to humanity, and I think that. And what we've seen is that it's as relevant now as it was in '77, perhaps even more so. As you said, I think that, when Tim Daly, who's one of my partners on the project, who's a manager at Amoeba Music, and I first started on this, and he kind of mentioned to me, oh, what if we, and I can tell you more about how we came to it, but we didn't realize it was a 40th anniversary until we started looking into it. It just hadn't occurred to us. But we realized that early on, of course. But, it's the perfect timing, really, for this. Because, as you said, I feel like people are really jonesing for a sense of hope about the future. And that really, the Voyager record, both as a project, as an undertaking, but also the content of it embodies that sense of hope and possibility and optimism. And I think it reflects, what humanity is capable of when we're at our best.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that sentiment, and I'm not really easy for that sort of.
Me either, as you know, yeah. I'm like our mutual friend Douglas Rushkoff always likes when I used to say I'm a gleeful nihilist.
Yeah, but, we have that crusty cyberpunk side, but there's something really. Actually, I want to hear the story when one of the things when I'm partly telling your story for you, but I know that when you contacted Tim Ferriss, who again was involved with the original project, one of the producers, he gave you his blessing and said, yeah, you can do it, but you got to remaster the thing, which meant that you had to find the masters, but that was not an easy, talk about
essentially, in short, the story was that, when I was 7 and the Voyager went up, and you're 7 years old and you hear that a group of people, when you're a space nerd, you hear that a group of people attached a phonograph record to 2 space probes and launched them off into the solar system on this grand tour, it sparks the imagination, and it always stuck with me. And then in the early 90s, when I went to study science journalism at UC Berkeley, I went to study under Tim Ferriss, who, besides being a great editor at Rolling Stone magazine, he was the producer of the original Voyager record and one of Carl Sagan's dear friends. And so I used to pepper him with questions about it. And then, shopping at Amoeba Music all the time, I became friendly with Tim Daly, who's a manager there, and he reminds me of you in that he's a sort of a amateur musicologist in a way, of experimental and unusual music. And we talked about doing a project together, and he said, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could do the Voyager record? And I was like, wow, I always loved the Voyager record. Could we do that? And he said, well, it sounds like a Wright's nightmare, which it was. And, but neither of us could stop thinking about it. And Tim said, well, the producer of the original record lives in San Francisco, this science journalist, Tim Ferriss. And I said, yeah, he was my graduate advisor at UC Berkeley. I'm going to, we've kept in touch. I'm going to give him a call. So I had lunch with Tim Ferriss, and it was, a lovely lunch. And I mentioned the idea to him, and he said, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. You should do that." And I said, "Oh, well, do you want to partner with us? Just as you could be the executive producer or advisor." And he said, "No, I've already done it, but you should go ahead and do it." So from there, we were off and running. But you're right. Tim always said, at the very beginning, he said, you got to remaster it from the original master tapes. And, Tim Daly and I were kind of like, well, that would be great, but I have no idea how we would do that or get access to that. And, we can probably find commercial releases of some of the material. And NASA has posted the greetings and the Sounds of Earth, which is that beautiful sound poem. It sounds almost like a piece of 70s avant-garde tape music of insects and trains and a baby's cry and a kiss, collaged together. But NASA has put that stuff on their own website. The sound quality is fairly poor, but we figured we could sort of do the best we can. So we started on the rights search, working with the Rights Workshop, this great boutique, rights clearance organization in the Bay Area. But every so often, Tim Ferriss would check in with us and say, did you get a hold of those masters yet? And, we were kind of like, oh man, what are we going to do here? But we knew that in 77, CBS Records kindly donated studio time and other resources to actually master and make the original Voyager record. And Tim Ferriss told us that at last he knew those master tapes were probably in some storage or archive of CBS Records, which of course is now owned by Sony Music. And with the help of some various introductions through friends of ours, through our friend at Light in the Attic, which is a great label, and just through research online, we connected with Matt Kelly, who is the head archivist or a archivist at Sony Music. Amazing job, and he knew about the record, and honestly, he was a little skeptical that they could find it. And it took some time, but eventually I got a phone call from him and then followed up by an email, and he said, "Oh, look what's on my desk right now." And the master tapes were there. This took several months. And those tapes had been stored in Iron Mountain, which is, a former coal mine that's now an underground storage facility, and they had been sitting there for 40 years. And now they were sitting on Matt Kelly's desk in New York City. And, the next thing I knew, we were on a plane, Tim Daly and I, and we met Tim Ferriss and his son Patrick Ferriss at Sony's historic Battery Studios. And there the tapes were. And even just the moment of seeing them and watching Tim Ferriss look at them and open up the boxes and see notes on legal pad, and he's like, "Wow, this is my handwriting." Notes on timing and sequence. There was some material that Andrienne, Sagan's widow, who was the creative director of the record, had made, and it was just all in front of us. And then the question was, how are they going to sound? Because these are 40-year-old tapes, and as we know, there were certain kinds of tape that would flake and deteriorate very quickly over time. The amazing engineers at Battery Studios had to bake the tapes, which for people who don't know is literally putting reels of tapes in an oven, very carefully, to cook them so that the magnetic material will stick on and not flake off long enough for you to play them to get a really high resolution digital transfer. And when they put those tapes on, and Tim Ferriss and Tim Daly and I sat there and listened to the entire Voyager record, we had listened to the material many times in various sources since we started the project and before, but it was just absolutely sublime. I mean, the Blind Willie Johnson and Solomon Island panpipes and Louis Armstrong and Bach and Beethoven washing over us in the studio from these tapes that hadn't been heard in 40 years was really deeply moving. I was surprised at how moved I really was. And,
yeah, I mean, it's
you know,
it's a funny one because I mean I also just listened to the whole thing. I sat down and just poured through it, and I have to say I really did not expect to be as impressed as I was by the quality of the selection and the particular recordings that were chosen. I mean, maybe I wouldn't have done everything exactly the way they did, but as somebody who listens to a lot of international music, who listens to classical music, who listens to Indian music, listens to rock and roll, like I have really wide-ranging tastes, a lot of these tracks, even some of the performers, like the Indian, the South Asian vocalist was Kesarbi Kirker. I don't know how to pronounce her name right,
yes.
but I have her records. I mean, I love her. I think she's one of my favorites. And so, like, it was actually kind of almost a little eerie for me how much, like, yeah, that's right. Johnny Be Good is the rock and roll track to put on this thing, and I'm glad they shoehorned it in there because I know some people weren't necessarily happy about that.
Yeah, that's
same
right.
thing with the Blind Willie Johnson, and also even just some of the juxtapositions of the tracks. Like for me, the way that the last two tracks are the Blind Willie Johnson going into Beethoven String Quartet,
Yes.
which is such a weird juxtaposition. Like it's so like quote unquote postmodern or whatever. It's so such different kinds of music, different sets of associations, highbrow, a folk, whatever you want to do with it. But it really works. I mean, it really works emotionally and particularly that Blind Willie Johnson song because one of the things you talk about in the essay and that Tim Ferriss talks about as well is one of the weird decisions behind the whole project of the Golden Record was like, well, what story do we tell about Earth? Do we tell a story that includes war and famine and misery and, violence and all of that? Or do we tell like a more kind of happy story? And it's a more of a happy story, which is itself kind of an interesting decision we can talk about. But for me, like, that Blind Willie Johnson track, which is so spooky. I mean, it's one of the most profound songs about mortality that exist in the entire archive, as far as I'm concerned. And so to have that in there, it's this way of speaking to like the full truth of the human experience without like reveling in the nightmarish sides of human civilization. So it was very beautifully curated. I mean, you can whatever, nitpick or if you want. But overall, I was really impressed with the kind of sense of like the representation of the globe.
Yeah, I mean that the as Tim Daly, my partner, said, it's one of the earliest and certainly one of the best world music compilations before that term was really in use. And I think that's a testament to to Tim Ferriss and Annie Drian and also Carl, who were the main folks who ultimately selected the music with, of course, a tremendous amount of input from the great Alan Lomax and also other musicologists who suggested material. But I mean, these what also struck me talking with Tim Ferriss about it is that, Tim and Annie and Carl were music fans. Tim talked frequently to me about how Carl would come over long before this project to his apartment in New York City, and they would sit and they would listen to records. And as Tim said, that was a thing that people did then. They had really, they had the best stereo they could afford, and they had friends over, and you would put on a record and you would spend time and listen to the music, and they were always sharing music with each other. Particularly, Tim Ferriss was interested in classical and the blues, and of course some rock and roll as well. That's a great story you mentioned about Chuck Berry, because I guess Alan Lomax had said that he thought that music shouldn't be on the record because, as he said, it was adolescent music, and Carl immediately responded, "Well, there are a lot of adolescents on Earth as well." But I think that's great. I mean, I think that that's why. When it came time to select a rock and roll track that they wanted to put on, Tim said that they chose that Chuck Berry track because, and that's the one he pushed for because it's sort of like the root of rock and roll. They could have gone with Dylan or the Stones or these other artists, but they were trying to get back to the essence.
Yeah, no, and it came through really, really well. I want to like put sort of, I'm trying to figure out exactly how to ask this, but you've been working in science and technology journalism, both as working for doing like straight writing about science and technology, helping ordinary folks understand things about nanotechnology and other future sciences that are already impacting our lives, are going to continue to do so. You've done the more pop culture side of science, technology, geekery with Boing Boing and stuff like that. So you've been in this zone of like seeing the larger and reflecting the larger cultural meanings that science and technology have for us, beyond their sort of just pure economic effects and things like that for a long time. Reflect a little bit about what this artifact says, maybe about the 70s, about why were they able to sort of have this? I mean, there'll never be a project like this now.
Never.
No way.
No.
So what was it about space technology? What was it about global consciousness? What was it about the hit with the 70s as sort of this hedonistic, whatever, but there's something really profoundly 70s about this project that I'd love to hear you riff on.
It absolutely is. I mean, I think that, and a lot of people have tried or are trying to create various kinds of messages and artworks and things like that, but it's never been as sort of, it's hard to imagine something as direct as we're making this record and we're bolting it to the outside of two space probes and launching it into space. It's really hard to imagine that happening now. And I think that, and for me, it fits perfectly in my longtime interests, which ultimately are at the intersection of science, technology, art, and culture to spark the imagination. And to instill a sense of curiosity. I mean, that's what I'm seeking, and that's what I try to convey in all the work that I do. And I think this project is an artifact that truly embodies that mindset. I mean, and in many ways it is so 70s, and I kept thinking sort of as it was this sort of utopian vision, but Annie Drian pointed out to me that it wasn't, the perfect time then either. I mean, we were in the midst of the Cold War. There was Nixon. It wasn't an ideal time, but there was excitement around, this notion of the future and futurism and our future in space. Other things that were going on at the same time. There was actual research going on, funded research on, Gerard O'Neill's space colonies. And, there was a beautiful funded study by NASA that resulted in those gorgeous illustrations of domed habitats, and rotating very 2001 space stations that you can find online. So there was a lot of that going on. There was this intersection almost between I don't want to say hippie, but the sort of post-hippie, psychedelic, kind of optimistic, futuristic, mindset. And, it wasn't the idea of the this ridiculous idea of the boring scientist in the lab coat. I mean, Carl Sagan, was a very hip guy, he was. And a lot of these people, Carl went to visit, was trying to visit it with Tim Leary, and all of these people knew each other. Carl and Annie met at a party, as I understand it, at Nora Ephron's house. I mean, there was, this kind of intellectual community of scientists and artists and literary people and heads were, we're all mixing together. And I think that's something that we saw in the 70s that we haven't really seen as much since then in the sciences, I dare say. I mean, you see it somewhat, or we saw it, I guess, in the early 90s in the cyberdelic culture. Yeah,
I was going to say, it seems like one of those things that waxes and wanes. Are you probably familiar with David Kaiser's book, How the Hippies Saved Physics?
I was trying to remember the name exactly.
Yeah.
that book explores a lot of this.
Yeah, and one of the things he talks about there is how, if you look at the history of physics, there are these waves where the first wave, the famous people, Heisenberg and all those characters, they were all kind of humanists and philosophers. They thought philosophically, they were interested in talking to people who were not, scientists. And then after the war, it just became super pragmatic and all about engineering and not asking philosophical questions. And then he kind of describes how in the 70s, partly because of these freak physicists, it kind of opens up again. And I think Carl Sagan, his television show, the great, mind-blowing Cosmos, and his own interests, and even the way he dealt with things he disagreed with, stuff about the paranormal or things that he was, he was still very much a rationalist, but he wasn't like our skeptics today. He had a kind of, he was still interested in the whole world and engaging these ideas, and he recognized that there was something really important in people's more irrational hopes and fantasies that he wanted to kind of engage. And so it really did feel like there was kind of an overlap there, for scientists.
I think there was. I mean, I think that Cosmos, that you bring that up, and I remember watching it as a kid, but I watched it again a few years ago in its entirety, the original Cosmos, and that's a deeply psychedelic show. The entire look and feel of it, it's just a very head show. I mean, it's super smart and it's super rational, and you learn a ton from it. But it's also, very visionary, very psychedelic, and both Carl and Annie, were very open about their marijuana use, and using that to augment their own creativity and thinking. So as you said, there was this overlap that was very prevalent at the time, I think, at least among some people.
Yeah, well, in a way, this gets us to the heart of your work too. I mean, what you've been doing in these different domains, in journalism, working for university departments, working for the Institute for the Future, working for Boing Boing, and as you said, is that there's something about the way in which, while staying within a rationalist frame, a scientific frame, not getting into woo, not getting into whatever, astrology or, all these things, that's another conversation. There's still a way of experiencing, wonder, imagination, And, it's even kind of a cliche, the wonder of the cosmos and all this kind of thing. But it's actually a very delicate space that needs to be cultivated. And I think you'd probably agree with me that, along with a lot of the other difficulties of our moment, one of the challenges is that science and technology, and even space science, it doesn't have that charge as much. And that there's something a little hollow even about the way that some scientific bodies, institutions, whatever, try to use the kind of wonder of the cosmos as a kind of like hype, but they don't. There's something kind of missing, I believe, in the sort of where there once was more of a sense that science and technology brought us into greater intimacy with the larger, bizarreness, weird wonderfulness of the world. And now it's so much more about strife and cash and institutional politics. And maybe I'm being a little bit romantic thinking that it was not always thus. But as somebody who's so keen on getting people excited, on addressing people's fears by also talking about possibilities, about how do you see that whole space in the culture really for that kind of wonder? Is it naive now? Is it what can it do to help us?
I think that that's one of the things that I feel very fortunate about, to be able to hang my hat at the Institute for the Future, where I have for a dozen years. The Institute for the Future is a nonprofit in Palo Alto. We've been around for about 50 years. So again, starting in 68, at that time. And, under Marina Gorbis as the executive director, she's always encouraged me and encouraged everyone to think about futurism and systematically thinking about the future. Not doing it with rigor, but as a hopeful act that connects us to our humanity, and as an empowering act. And how do you get people to think about the future? Well, you can get people to think about the future by scaring the hell out of them. That's not particularly fun, and I'm not sure how hopeful or how helpful or hopeful that is. It's one way to engage people, and you want people to understand the darker possibilities of things. But by conveying a sense of awe and wonder when you're thinking about the future, I think that really is a way to engage everyone in the conversation. I mean, and so I try to think about the future through the lens of art, and also through the lens of magic. Magic is a way, I think, that can help us get our heads around, the possibilities that were once considered by many to be impossible. So, I oftentimes use metaphors and magic, and wonder to convey that sense of possibility and optimism in the work that I do there as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. There is something about magic. I mean, we have our mutual friend Ferdinando Busquema, who's been on the show as well. He really taught me a lot about how to think about magical effects. I mean, we're talking stage magic here.
Yes.
That, we normally think of it in a very lowbrow way that's sort of been kind of the de facto attitude that the entertainment industry and the history of magic as entertainment has sort of given us, which is like, oh, it's kind of, a way for a guy to fool you and to sort of enjoy fooling you. And you kind of, you have these sorts of experiences. But Ferdinando really taught me that how much profundity lies in that experience of that moment of like absolute astonishment at something being happened, knowing that it did not happen through any supernatural means, and yet knowing just as strongly that you cannot figure it out, and that there's something mysterious about the world that you haven't figured out, and that's a very, though sometimes disturbing, is a very positive way of it. Keeps you open. It keeps you asking questions. It keeps you recognizing that even if wonder does not require something completely mysterious, it just requires the right sort of mystery.
That's right. I think that, and I mean, I think that, I'm much more interested really in, and I know science is super important to understand our world, of course. But I'm personally more interested less interested in science as a way to answer questions, and more as a way to ask questions, because I like the idea of the unknown. Not that things are unknowable necessarily, although perhaps some things are. But I think the idea of the unknown is particularly attractive and seductive, and that's what I mean when I think about when I talk about thinking about things that were once impossible but that are becoming possible through science and technology. When we talk about magic, thinking about things like mind reading or levitation or teleportation or any of these kinds of phenomena that are historically in the realm of magic, but through technology become something real in some way. And so I think if you can frame things through that lens of magic, even using some of the terminology, and even borrowing from not just stage magic, from occult magic, and I'm not a practitioner, and I'm certainly no expert on it, although I like to read about it. I think that's a way to get people engaged and to give that sense of hope and possibility.
Yeah, one of the things for me, why I think that that gesture towards wonder is really important, especially today, is that I think, in general, we've got, if you make a distinction between science and technology here, which is, a little bit fragile, but, if let's say science is about understanding the natural world, the world out there, the world that is not constructed by humans, and that technology uses some of those principles to actually make things that are of human design and human uses, but open us up and allow us to be in the world in a different way. That one of the things that's happened is that we've become more and more and more technological, and even the sciences are more technological. So, for example, my father is an oceanographer, and he laments sometimes that his field is overwhelmingly now dominated by computer models. So because people are trying to figure out the weather, so they're trying to figure out global warming, so they're pouring all this data into these models, and then it's about algorithms and tweaking the algorithms, and in that process, you have far, far fewer people who are actually going out and measuring the planet. Whereas in his generation, you had all these people trying to figure out more robust ways to get actual data from the planet as it is, from the outside, from outside the lab, outside of what we know. And there's something about the way that technology, digital technology, social networks, the internet, have sort of created these feedback loops where people are able to sort of be within the environs of technology and sort of live their lives and think about the world from within these matrices. And they never really stop anymore to kind of lean out and go, oh my God, we're on a physical planet that's hurtling through deep space. And there are these animals and there's these things, thousands and thousands of plants we don't know anything about. And I mean, there's a whole exterior world that is available for wonder, even for horror, but it's there. It's part of our reality. But there's something about our contemporary conditions that pull people in to these looping networks. And so it's so important to be able to open up portals so that people are drawn out again into the outside, into outside completely human frameworks.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, but I also think that at the same time as we're spending so much time, excuse me, in these mediated environments online in various forms. At the same time, we are developing amazing new instrumentation to understand our planet on a much deeper level at very high resolution. So if you think about, tiny sensors that cost pennies or less than pennies each, that can be, sprinkled across an a site of some kind, or underwater, and actually can create a very high resolution image and collect very high resolution data about the world. We have the opportunity and the technology to learn more about the processes underlying our planet and than we ever have before. I mean, I think that, and that's one of the other things I'm interested in and have been for a long time through my work at the Institute, is the future of simulation. So, as we collect more and more data about the world and about the processes underlying how our world works and have faster and better computer processing, we can create very, very high resolution simulations of reality, to be able to explore our world at different levels. Across different scales, both in terms of time and size, being able to really understand, the how cells interact, or the various, invisible microscopic creatures, teeming through our bodies. And being able to explore those and understand and interact with them in new ways, I think, opens our eyes.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's funny. I've reached this point where I'm actually really bored by almost all entertainment simulations. There's something in me that I just like if I go see a Hollywood film, when when you get to the CGI part, I just don't care anymore. I just somehow I just been ejected from that. But if you handed me an Oculus Rift and said, yeah, now you're going to be able to go inside of a really high quality, simulation based on all of this micro data of the circulatory system, or go inside your guts, or go inside the vents at the bottom of the sea, or go inside, explore the moons of Jupiter. Like, I'm there in a heartbeat. Like, I want, that is like, and I really have a lot of, hope for that, because it does feel like it's one of the things that people who are secular, people who are religious, people who are on one side, whatever, that it's something that people can kind of unite around, the excitement of this outside, outside world. And this record speaks to that. That's again, part of what's going on here is like, this optimism about encountering not just the physical space, of course, because we're actually talking about encountering other beings. And that's one of the weird things about this record too. It's all based on a story, let's say, of the possibility of, intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. And again, that's also something that's changed. And I'd love to hear you talk about how you see that changing. Like in the 70s, there was a way where, the president of the United States could write about maybe encountering other intelligence.
Isn't that unbelievable? Unbelievable. President Carter wrote a beautiful, beautiful statement that's encoded on the record as an image. There's more than 100 images that were basically translated into audio signals, kind of like the way a fax machine works, and stored as an audio signal on the record. And the iconic cover, what most people associate with the Voyager record is actually the jacket. It's a gold aluminum plate that covers the record on the outside of the Voyager, and engraved in it is this amazing diagram that mostly Frank Drake came up with, who's a SETI pioneer, that explains where the record came from. It's a pulsar map, and then also these schematics of how to play it, how to play the audio, and how to convert the image data back into images. And they spent a tremendous amount of time trying to figure out a way to explain this without using, English for a potential extraterrestrial. I mean, that thinking about time and space. I mean, as Tim Ferriss wrote in his essay, the Voyagers are on a mission not just through space but also through time. These things are designed and will probably last billions of years. I mean, that's an unbelievable, it's almost an inconceivable amount of time that they're going to be traveling among the stars. And, that's why it seems, maybe it's not likely that an extraterrestrial intelligence will intercept the probes and play the record, but it's absolutely within the realm of possibility. That's why when people say things like, well, they're never going to figure out how to play this record, or, what it actually is. But if you think about that, this hypothetical extraterrestrial intelligence is intelligent enough to be able to intercept this probe, basically to grab it, to find it and grab it, then chances are they won't really have a hard time translating those grooves into an electrical signal.
Yeah, it's true. I did want to read more about the technical. That was the only thing I missed from the package. Was I wanted a whole essay that was sort of about the thinking of how to represent, how to play the record. Like how, I mean, I know that you have the panel that shows you the instruction, but it's almost like, because that's one of the elements of I don't want to say utopianism, but the hopefulness of this is just the belief that communication is possible. And it, it made me think about, on the other side of the fence, there's some of my favorite novels by Stanislaw Lem, the great Polish science fiction writer, are about how it doesn't quite work. Like, even though that you're getting an there's like one called His Master's Voice, where they know they're getting intelligent signals, they're able to break them down, and they're serious scientists, but there's like a certain point where they can never quite jump over into meaning.
Yeah.
And it's such a fascinating point. And so that, but Lem is more critical. He's more a bit of a pessimist, This is very optimistic, not just in terms of representing a fairly happy story about Earth, but that just the idea that communication could happen and that communication is something that we would want to do. And now you have people, smart, famous scientists saying, "Oh, let's pipe down, maybe. We don't want them to hear us." And it's such an about face. It's really extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. I was on a panel at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab last week with some amazing people, much smarter than I am, including Annie Drian, who was the creative director, and someone brought that up. About should we not tell them we're here? And then there was an article, recently that Nadia Drake, who's an amazing science writer for National Geographic, she's the daughter of Frank Drake. She wrote about the pulsar map on the record. And, of course, all these people are saying, I can't believe we sent out a map of how to get here. And, that's so risky. But what Annie said at the panel really, really struck me. She said, so basically the logic is with that mindset is that there's an extraterrestrial intelligence that is so much more advanced than we are that they are actually able to travel these incredible distances to come to Earth, but yet they are so emotionally stunted that they would come here to eat us or to destroy us. I again, that provides me with that's an optimistic and a hopeful statement, but it's also, I think a very, very provocative one. Why should we think that somebody who's so advanced, would still be thinking about, coming here to destroy us?
Yeah, it really is it's a reflector, it's a mirror. And again, that's what's so great about this coming on the 40th anniversary, year of the original probes and the 50th anniversary of Sputnik, of entering into this kind of era. And I'm glad there's a lot of attention on this record, because not just because I think it's a cool thing and it should be listened to, but it does kind of force us to sort of see, like, well, where's our mirror now? What are we reflecting now? And it's sad that we're dominated by fear now, and even those of us who fight against it, we spend a lot of time being afraid of the future and on this, or afraid of aliens, or afraid of artificial intelligence, or of course afraid of global warming and all of these kinds of things. And so I think it's good to remind us that you don't have to have that attitude necessarily.
Well, I think also, I can't remember who said it from the original committee, but Voyager committee, Voyager record. But they have been criticized, of course, of this is such a peaceful message, and they made a very conscious decision not to show, an atomic bomb explosion or, famine or these other things that were very real and continue to be very real to this day. But I can't remember who said it. The point, when you introduce yourself to somebody new, do you immediately say, "Hi, I'm David. Let me open my closet and show you all the skeletons that are that are in there, or all the, let me tell you about all the nasty stuff I've done or do." That's just not how people, reach out and try to make a new friend.
Yeah.
So while absolutely, it's a somewhat a utopian vision. The pictures, the music, all of the greetings. I don't think I'd particularly want, to reflect of, Earth is so terrible, stay the hell away.
Well, it's also, I think, a part about the imagination of a planetary civilization. One of Jimmy Carter's lines in his wonderful message is, we hope someday, having solved the problems we face, to join a community of galactic civilizations. And it's sort of like this, and he also talks about how we human beings are still divided into nation states, but these states are rapidly becoming a single global civilization.
Isn't that interesting?
And in a way, the 20th century was kind of defined by this movement towards globalism. In the early 20th century, people talked about a planetary religion. There was this idea of an ecumenical, like a drawing together of different faiths. And then you have the United Nations following, and then world wars or the dark side of it. But there's all this move towards globalization. And I think part of the difficulty of our moment now, and part of the pessimism and the fear, is that model, that sense that along with increasing economic interdependence, increasing technological interdependence, and a stitching together of space and time through media, that there would come a sort of collective effervescence or a kind of drawing together that is sort of hard to find now. And we're in the opposite phase. We're going into growing nationalisms and fears about digital technology and botnets from the other side of the planet, undermining democracy, et cetera, et cetera. We're in the sort of shadow phase of globalization. And it's kind of remarkable, because I think part of the positive images you're talking about aren't just about not leading with the skeletons in your closet, but it's also that there was still at that time a sense that the process of globalization, for all its problems, and now we can recognize for a lot of its economic inequalities and aggression, and we can have a whole critical conversation about it, but there was still a sense that process brought goods along with it that we could all recognize, and I think those are very hard to articulate.
I think that it should. Yeah, I mean, it was a time when people felt that a lot of people felt we were moving in the right direction, I think. And I think that people ask me all the time, well, how can you remain optimistic? And I'm not always optimistic, but I think it was, may have been Kevin Kelly or Stuart Brand who talks about that over the long term, the very long term, things are getting better. And I cling to that, unless of course we destroy ourselves completely first. And I mean, maybe that's where I don't know, maybe that's where my nihilism comes in. I mean, if that's the case, that's the case, and we're gone. And, the reality is that record, those records are still going to be, traveling among the stars, long after we're burnt to a crisp, either, 10 years from now or, 10,000 years from now.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing. I've had a flash sometimes, and it's almost like it's not quite a story, but it was like a science fiction scenario that I've been thinking about for years, which is the idea, it's like that what is valuable about, like, if you imagine that there are many civilizations have come and gone in the universe, or even just in our galaxy, but that they have a kind of lifespan, and that it's actually quite likely for them to collapse, which is something a lot of people have talked about. And I think, in a non-pessimistic way, I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that, whether it's because of developing terrible weapons, or even for developing narcissistic social media, where you just get kind of stuck in these sort of virtual cul-de-sacs, and people kind of stop communicating, which is another argument people make about why don't we see more civilizations. But what this led me to is imagining this kind of these alien anthropologists, and their job is to just like cruise the universe, trying to find these civilizations, recognizing that most of them won't make it. And then when they arrive, what do they care about? Do they care about their economic systems? Do they care about the particular form of internal combustion engines they make, or whatever? No, they want the art. They want, because art is so contingent, so it's not going to be the same. If we have an Earth 2 and you have all the same initial conditions, their technology might be sort of different, maybe even quite different, but their culture is going to be totally different. And there's something, even just the diversity of the Earth is just extraordinary, a diversity that we are now, undermining, along with the diversity of languages, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the juicy stuff, is like all of that richness, all of that unexpectedness, the of sounds and, poets and metaphors and all that kind of, that's really what's most valuable. And so there's something deeply poetic about the Voyager, the fact those records right now are doing that. There is this kind of gesture of, this was us too. Yes. Beethoven and panpipes and, blues music and stuff.
That's right, because the Voyager probe itself, it's pure technology and pure science, right? As Tim Ferriss said, the Voyager record is really the complete non-scientific part of the Voyager mission. I think there is some science behind it, and Frank Drake would probably say the same. But it's really the other side. It is that side that you're talking about. Here's this pure technological probe that's going out there and doing science, and attached to it is a piece of culture. And I when I first had a conversation, I think with Annie Drian about our project, and I was a little bit hesitant to say this, but I said that I thought of the Voyager record as this stunning piece of conceptual art, and she agreed with me, which of course made me feel good. But they weren't under some pretense here when they made this thing that what they were doing was some great scientific endeavor. They were trying to represent culture and create a piece of art. I mean, when people asked Tim Ferriss, what were your guidelines when you were selecting the music, and he said, well, we wanted to represent many different cultures, not just the one that produced the Voyager probe, but the second was we wanted to make a good record. And when I was sitting in Battery Studios with Tim Daly and we heard the sounds of Earth echoing around the room, and we heard Beethoven and Chuck Berry and Blind Willie, when that was over and the final strains of Beethoven faded out, Tim looked over to me and he said, "Yeah, it's a good record, right?" I said, "Yeah, it's a good record."
Well, that's great. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. That's a perfect ending there, David. So we didn't end up talking about Boing Boing, but we'll do it some other time. So thanks so much for joining us on Expanding Mind. That's great. All right, that was Dave Pescovitz, and of course we're talking about the Interstellar Voyager Golden Record 40th Anniversary Edition, and it's a big fancy box. Check it out, and you'll see David's name on Boing Boing. Until next week, keep your minds open.